Today we're diving into one of the most clever and, yeah, one of the most controversial tools in the history of social psychology. It's a technique that was designed to get past all our social filters and find out what we really think, all through a pretty elaborate deception. This is the story of the bogus pipeline.
So let's start with a really fundamental problem that researchers face all the time. How do you get someone to tell you their actual honest-to-goodness opinion, especially when the topic is sensitive?
You know how it is. If you ask someone about a tricky subject, like their biases or maybe their personal habits, you often run into this wall of socially desirable responding. Basically, we're all kind of wired to give the answer we think we're supposed to give, not necessarily the one that's 100% true. And for psychologists, this makes getting genuine insight incredibly difficult. So, back in the 1970s, two researchers, Jones and Segal, they came up with this brilliantly deceptive solution. It was a psychological end run designed to convince people that lying just wasn't an option. They called it the bogus pipeline. And get this, the whole point wasn't to actually detect lies. Nope, the point was to make people believe their lies would be detected. It was a mind game. This intense psychological pressure was supposed to convince participants that some fancy machine could read their innermost thoughts, so hey, they might as well just tell the truth from the get-go. So how'd they pull it off? Well, it was basically a three-act play. First, they'd wheel out this super intimidating, complex-looking machine covered in dials and blinking lights. Then, the researcher would prove to the participant that it was a foolproof lie detector that could read their true feelings. And only then, once the person was totally convinced they couldn't get away with a lie, would the real questions begin. And here's where it gets messy. The bogus pipeline apparently works, but its entire foundation is built on a lie. This opens up a massive ethical can of worms. Does the value of getting a truthful answer justify deceiving people to get it? This quote from researchers Aguinas and Handelsman really nails the problem. See, it's not just one simple lie. It's the unique combination of everything. The intimidating machinery, the direct misinformation, the sensitive personal questions that turns the bogus pipeline into a real ethical minefield. So you've basically got two camps in this debate. On one side, you have the just another tool argument. People say, hey, deception is pretty common in psychology, it's sometimes necessary, and the BTL is just another version of that. But the other side says, whoa, not so fast. They argue that you can't just lump all deception together. The BPL's unique mix of high-tech fakery and intense psychological pressure means it has to be judged on its own, much stricter terms. All right, so to get a better handle on this, we can kind of set aside the philosophy for a minute and look at it from a more practical, utilitarian perspective, one that's all about the consequences. This approach boils the whole dilemma down to one simple question. Do the benefits of doing the research outweigh the potential costs to the people participating? You know, if the knowledge we gain is huge and the harm to people is tiny, maybe the BPL is justified. But first, you've got to be able to measure both sides of that equation. So what are the benefits? Well, when you look at reviews of dozens of these studies, the BPL is actually highly effective for some topics. It gets much more honest answers about things like cigarette smoking or prejudiced attitudes. But, and this is fascinating, it shows no benefit at all for other topics, like how much alcohol or marijuana people use. So the benefits are real, but they're definitely not universal. Okay, so we have data on the benefits. We have a pretty good idea of where it works and where it doesn't. But what about the other side of that scale? What are the costs? What's the psychological impact on the people who go through this? Well, that's where the data just kind of dries up. And this brings us right to the core argument of the source paper we're looking at. This whole ethical debate can't be settled by philosophical arguments alone. If we're really going to weigh the costs and benefits, we need cold, hard data. I mean, these are the huge, unanswered questions. Just imagine being a participant who finds out it was all a fake. Would you feel embarrassed? Annoyed? Would you start to lose your trust in scientists in general? We just don't know because we don't have the data. And that's the crucial point. The whole ethical justification for using the bogus pipeline rests on this assumption that the costs are minimal. But without any actual data, that's really just a guess. The researchers argue we need to stop guessing and start measuring. And they propose a pretty elegant and totally ethical way to gather this data. You don't actually have to deceive more people. Instead, you can just have potential participants read a summary of a BPL experiment and then ask them directly, how would this make you feel?
Do you think the science was worth the deception? It's a completely safe way to finally start measuring the real human cost.
So, when you zoom out, this whole debate about a fake lie detector from the 70s really forces us to grapple with a timeless and absolutely fundamental question about science itself. At its heart, this whole thing is about the tension between two duties that scientists have: the quest for objective truth on one hand, and the ethical treatment of human beings on the other. The bogus pipeline sits right on that razor's edge, forcing us to ask which one gets priority. And that leaves us with this final, critical question. Look, the bogus pipeline was a clever tool, no doubt, and it was born from a genuine desire to understand the human mind. But it's also a powerful reminder that in science, how we find the answers matters just as much as the answers themselves. So we have to keep asking, when is the price of truth just too high to pay?